In this video, I'm going to talk about whether 2025 is the best time to buy a property and the 6 reasons why I'm about to make a multi-million-dollar property decision, one that's going to impact me for the next 10 years. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ed, an economist and property investor here at Opus Partners. And to tell you the story about whether 2025 is the best time to buy a property, I actually need to take you back to just a few weeks ago. I was getting ready to speak at the New Zealand Property Investors Conference to about 350 property investors. And as I usually do before all of these presentations, I rerun all of the key numbers about how the New Zealand housing market is going right now. So I went and I talked to a whole heap of investors during lunch. And when I hopped on the plane to go home, I looked at my fiance and said, I know we've been planning to buy a house for us to live in kind of mid 2025. But I actually think we need to pull it forward. I think we should do it now because of what the data is showing me. And I know that I'm in a privileged position. Not everybody is in their early 30s owning a couple of investment properties and ready to buy a family home. So I'm not trying to say you need to do exactly what I do and why aren't you investing in property yet?
I should have bought myself a home when I was a fetus.
But I encourage people to come on the Property Academy podcast every week for Case Study Sunday and share what they're doing in property, whether they're just at the start of their journey or whether they own 2, 4, 6, or even 60 properties. Because it's important that we New Zealanders talk openly about money because we usually shy away from it. So I actually think it would be hypocritical if I don't share with you what I'm doing too. Now, that's not to say that I know everything or do what I do because I'm so rich, because I'm not, and I'm learning too. I'm on my journey recording these videos for you. So let's get into those 6 data points that are making me pull forward that decision to say, yeah, I think early 2025 is the best time to buy a property, at least it is for me. First, interest rates are falling. The 1-year interest rate has tumbled from 7.4% at the start of the year down to 5.99%. And in fact, some banks are regularly discounting this to 5.79% behind the scenes. Now, that means that people can borrow more to spend on a house and still keep their mortgage repayment the same. So let's say you're willing to spend $800 a week on your mortgage repayment, and at the high interest rates of 7.39%, you could afford a mortgage of about just over $500,000. But now that interest rates have fallen, that same $800 a week at 5.79% stretches to $590,000. So your mortgage can stay the same, but you can actually borrow an extra $90,000 more in this example. So as people are buying property, they're more inclined to put their hand up one more time at auction or offer that extra $10,000 just to make sure that they get the house. And that's how house prices start to rise. And what that makes me think is 2 things. First of all, it means that my mortgage repayment is going to be more affordable on this home and also for my investment properties compared to the peak of the market. So that's allowing me to pull that decision forward. But it's not just the fact that you're paying a lower interest rate. We've got to think about whether the bank will lend you money too. The second factor is that banks are more willing to lend money. So when you apply for a mortgage, you might be paying a 6% interest rate. But the bank will actually see if you can afford that mortgage on an 8% interest rate. And that's what we call the servicing test rate. And the higher the test rate that the banks use, the less you can borrow. But here's the thing, servicing test rates are falling. At the start of the year, Westpac was testing your mortgage to see if you could afford it at 9.1%. That's fallen by almost a percentage point. So if you could afford to borrow, let's call it $500K to go and buy a house, today you might be able to borrow $45,000 more, even if you earn exactly the same, because the banks are changing how they assess your mortgage. That means you can afford to borrow roughly 9% more. And I was actually talking to the team at the Sunday Star Times newspaper about this over the weekend. The lower servicing test rate, well, that means that people have the means to spend more on a property. They can put their hand up one more time at auction. But then that lower interest rate we talked about that you're actually paying, that gives buyers the motivation to spend more. So lower interest rates give us the means and the motivation to spend more. So as a buyer, that makes me think that if me and Ange, my fiance, wait till next year to buy a house, maybe we're going to end up paying more money to buy the same house. And if you want to see more of these here's what I'm doing in property type of videos, do me a quick favor and hit the like button. That's how I know if these are the sorts of videos you actually want to see more of. And honestly, it just helps out the YouTube algorithm. Subscribing, that helps too. We have just hit our goal of 20,000 subscribers, and I'm really grateful to you for subscribing, because seeing you watching and enjoying these videos, that gives me the motivation to keep putting them out. Now, coming back to the data, the third reason that I think 2025 is the best time for me to buy a property is that property prices have fallen quite a bit. They feel low, at least compared to how expensive property prices usually are in New Zealand. Now, don't get me wrong, houses are expensive, but house prices are currently 15.8% below the peak of the market in 2021. In Auckland, where I'm planning to buy, property prices are 21% below their peak. Now, if we adjust that for incomes, the house price to income ratio is lower today than it was back in 2019 pre-COVID. So since the end of 2019, house prices are up 23%, but the average income is up 27%. Now, it's not an exact comparison because interest rates are higher today, but I want to buy a house. I either do it today or I wait. The fact that house prices are 16% under their peak and the house price to income ratio is where it was back in 2019, that makes me feel pretty comfortable about buying in today's market. And that leads into the fourth reason, that property prices appear to be bottoming out. You see, property prices bottomed out in May 2023. They then increased for 9 months before starting to fall again in February 2024. But the pace of those falls has slowed down since about May, June, and July. You see, property prices were actually flat in August and then started increasing in September. Now, of course, one sunny day doesn't make a hot summer, but we are going into the warmer months, and my research shows that property prices, well, they tend to increase in summer, which is actually one of the reasons why the peak of the market often tends to be in summer, like November or October, and the bottom of the market is often in winter. So heading into those warmer months, that makes me feel more confident about a potential recovery. Now, I don't have months and months of data to show me that property prices are definitely increasing. But here's the thing. If I wait for that data to come through, I will have actually missed out on buying close, or as close as possible, to the bottom of the market. So I actually want to get in there early. So if property prices rise, I don't have to pay that higher price. Now, of course, I could be wrong, but it feels like my opportunity to buy at the bottom of the market could be closing. And just before we get into reason 5 and 6, I get that there might be people down in the comments section saying, bro is trying real hard to convince himself it's a good time to buy. Or maybe even, Ed, you own a company that makes money if people invest. Of course you're going to say it's a good time to buy. And that's actually the reason why we're going through the facts and the data, and I'm putting my money where my big mouth is. I'm actually showing you what I'm doing in real life. And of course, just because it's the right time for me to buy, that doesn't mean it's the right time for you to buy automatically, right? For instance, I recently got engaged. Now, I don't actually care about whether I own a house to live in or not. I've been happy being a rentvestor, renting a house to live in, but owning rental properties. But owning a house is really important to my fiancée, Ange. And of course, the goal in getting married is to make each other happy. So if it's important to her and it's the right time in the market, we'll do it. But if I step back and I ask myself, well, what would I need to see to make me think that it's a good time to buy right now? Well, these are the factors I'd be looking for. Falling interest rates that make my mortgage cheaper. Property prices that are close to the bottom of the market, but giving signs that they might be about to turn. High levels of listings that give me options, which we'll talk about in a minute. And properties taking a decent time to sell so I can negotiate. Well, I can't buy a property 10 years ago when property prices were cheaper, so I can either buy today or I can wait. And if I'm going to wait for a better time to buy, if I'm going to wait for better data, I think I'm actually going to be waiting a long time, because a lot of the data I'm looking at, it does feel pretty convincing. And that leads into reason number 5, which is if we look at the time it takes for properties to sell, back at the peak of the market, it was taking 32 days to sell a property in Auckland during the COVID property boom. Now, properties are taking an extra 2 weeks to sell. And what that means is that I've got more time to look at properties and negotiate a good deal. It means there's less competition with other buyers, and so I don't have to buy into the fear of missing out. The other thing is that only around a third of properties that are currently going to auction are selling at auction. So even if I turn up to an auction and the sale doesn't go through, there is more room for negotiation than there usually is. On top of that, reason number 6 is that there are lots of properties on the market. So buying a family home, I've got a lot of choice. You know, there are 33,000 houses on the market currently available at realestate.co.nz. We have not seen this level of listings since 9 years ago, back in 2015. There are over double the houses on the market available for sale today compared to the COVID-19 boom. So there is a better chance of finding the right house because there are just simply more properties available for sale. Again, with the current level of buyers, that means a lot of supply, not a lot of competition. And that means when I make this 7-figure decision to buy a house, that I can really take the time to find the one that will be the right one for the next 10 years plus. And that's why, at least for me, early 2025 does feel like the best time to buy a house for me and my future family.